The morning before my daughter's wedding, I discovered that someone had removed my fence overnight, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. I stood at the edge of my ranch, looking at the empty space where that fence had protected the boundary of my land for years. My first thought was not anger. It was confusion. Who would come onto my property and make a decision that was not theirs to make? The answer came when I checked the security footage. The HOA had sent workers to remove the fence because they believed the boundary line was incorrect. Their president, Rebecca Whitmore, claimed they were simply fixing a community issue. But there was one detail she did not understand. The land was not community property. It was mine. My name is Daniel Carter, and my family has owned this 1,600-acre ranch for years. The fence was not just a structure. It marked the boundary of a place that carried generations of memories and hard work. With my daughter's wedding only days away, the timing made the situation even more stressful. Guests were preparing to arrive, decorations were being arranged, and the ranch was supposed to become the perfect setting for a celebration. Instead, I was standing there trying to understand why the HOA believed they had the authority to change my property. I decided not to confront Rebecca emotionally. I knew the only way to solve this was to understand exactly what the HOA was relying on. I gathered my property documents, checked the county records, and reviewed every piece of information connected to the boundary. That was when I found the first unusual detail. The HOA was not using the official county survey. They were using a different map. A map that showed a completely different boundary line. At first, I thought it was just an outdated document. But when I compared it with the official records, I realized this was not a simple mistake. Someone had been relying on this map for a long time. I contacted my attorney and asked him to review the documents. The more we examined the records, the more questions appeared. Why did the HOA trust this map? Who created it? And why had nobody checked the official property records before removing my fence? The wedding countdown continued, and I had very little time to find answers. But then I received a message from a neighbor who had lived in the community for decades. He told me there was something I needed to know about that old map. According to him, the HOA had been warned about the boundary issue years earlier. And the person who gave that warning was someone who had once been part of the HOA leadership. The message from my longtime neighbor changed the direction of everything. I had expected to find a simple explanation for the missing fence, but instead I discovered that this problem had existed long before I ever knew about it. His name was Mark Sullivan, and he had lived near my ranch for more than 30 years. He agreed to meet with me that afternoon and explain what he knew about the old boundary map. When we sat down, Mark told me that the map the HOA was using was not created for property ownership. It was created during the early planning stages of the community. Years ago, developers had drawn possible layouts showing how roads, open spaces, and future improvements might look. The map was never meant to replace official surveys or property records. It was simply a planning idea. But over time, copies of that map were passed from one HOA board member to another. Eventually, people started treating it as if it represented the true property boundaries. That was the first major clue. The HOA was not relying on a legal document. They were relying on a misunderstanding that had grown stronger with every passing year. I asked Mark why nobody had corrected the mistake before. His answer surprised me. He said someone actually tried. According to him, a former HOA board member had raised concerns years earlier after comparing the planning map with county records. That person warned the board that the boundaries needed to be verified before making any decisions involving private land. But the warning was never fully investigated. The issue was forgotten until the day my fence disappeared. I realized the problem was bigger than Rebecca Whitmore. The HOA president believed she was protecting the community because she trusted information that had been repeated for years. But the foundation of that belief was never properly checked. With my daughter's wedding approaching, I knew I could not wait. I needed official proof before the HOA made another decision about my property. I contacted the county office and requested every available record connected to my ranch boundaries. The documents arrived the next morning. Inside the file was the official property survey, and it showed something very different from the HOA map. The fence had been exactly where it belonged. The boundary had never changed. The HOA had removed a fence based on a document that was never legally accurate. But there was another detail hidden in the records. Attached to the original survey was a note from a county official explaining that any future changes to the property boundary would require direct approval from the landowner. That approval had never happened. I now had evidence proving the HOA had acted without the authority they believed they had. But as I prepared to confront the issue legally, I received another unexpected message. Mark told me there was one more person who knew the complete history of the map. Someone who had been present when the original plans were created. And that person had a document that could reveal exactly how this misunderstanding started. The person Mark Sullivan mentioned turned out to be the one person who could explain how the confusion began. His name was Thomas Bennett, and he had been involved with the community planning process many years before Rebecca Whitmore became HOA president. When I contacted him, he agreed to meet and bring the records he had saved from that time. I expected to find another old map or a few notes, but what Thomas brought revealed a much bigger story. He placed a folder on the table and explained that the original developers created several planning concepts for the area. They were ideas for possible improvements, not final decisions. One of those ideas showed a different layout that included a possible adjustment near my property. But the important detail was written clearly on the documents. None of those plans could change private property boundaries without official approval from the landowner and the county. Thomas explained that when the community was first growing, people often looked at these planning materials during meetings because they helped visualize future possibilities. Over time, however, the meaning of those documents changed. New board members saw the maps without the original explanations. They saw lines on paper but not the legal limitations behind those lines. That was how a planning document slowly became something people treated like a property record. I asked Thomas why he never stepped forward earlier. He told me he believed the issue would eventually be corrected when someone compared the old planning materials with the official surveys. He never imagined the HOA would take action based on those documents years later. Hearing that changed my perspective. The situation was not created by one single moment. It was the result of years of assumptions building on top of each other. But when those assumptions affected my property, I had to protect my rights. With the wedding only a short time away, I organized all the evidence together. I now had the security footage showing the fence removal, the official county survey, the note requiring landowner approval, and Thomas's explanation of the original planning documents. The pieces were finally connecting. The HOA believed they were correcting a mistake, but they were actually acting on information that had never been legally valid. I decided to request a formal meeting with Rebecca and the HOA board before taking the matter further. I wanted them to see the evidence and understand what had happened. When I arrived, Rebecca was still confident that the HOA had acted correctly. She explained that the board had relied on records maintained by previous leaders and believed they were protecting the community. I placed the official survey on the table and asked one simple question. If the HOA believed the boundary had changed, where was the signed approval from the actual landowner? Nobody had an answer. The room became quiet as everyone realized the missing document was the one thing they needed most. But before the meeting ended, Rebecca revealed something unexpected. She said the HOA had another document they had not yet reviewed because it was stored in an older archive. A document that could finally prove whether the HOA had a legitimate claim or whether the entire dispute had been built on a mistake. The archive document Rebecca mentioned became the next piece of the puzzle. The following morning, I waited for the HOA board to locate the file because I knew the answer was hidden somewhere inside their own records. I was no longer trying to prove that I was right through an argument. I wanted the truth to speak for itself. When the document finally arrived, everyone expected it to support the HOA's position. Rebecca was confident that the old archive would show why the board believed the boundary needed to be changed. But when the folder was opened, the first page immediately caught my attention. It was not a property agreement. It was a meeting summary from years earlier. The document explained that the planning maps were only visual guides and that all property questions had to be confirmed through official county records. The exact warning that had been forgotten was sitting inside the HOA's own archive. For a moment, nobody said anything. The same organization that believed it had the authority to remove my fence had been keeping the information that showed why it could not. Rebecca looked through the pages carefully, and I could see that this was the first time she had seen the complete history of the situation. She had inherited a belief, not a verified fact. But there was still one important question. Why had the fence removal happened so quickly before the wedding? I reviewed the timeline again. The HOA had not simply discovered an issue. They had made a decision based on incomplete information and acted before confirming the legal details. That decision created a problem that affected my family event and my property. I knew the next step had to be handled carefully. I requested that the HOA officially review the evidence and document their response. My attorney prepared a complete record including the county survey, the security footage, the original planning notes, and the statements from people who understood the history of the land. Meanwhile, the wedding preparations continued. My family tried to focus on the celebration, but everyone knew there was still an unresolved situation outside. The empty space where the fence had been removed was a constant reminder that the issue was not finished. Then, just when I thought we had uncovered everything, another detail appeared. While reviewing the HOA records, my attorney found a message from a former board member that had never been discussed during any meeting. The message was written years earlier and mentioned concerns about the exact boundary where my fence stood. It was not just a warning. It was proof that someone inside the HOA had questioned the same mistake long before I became involved. The discovery changed everything because it meant this was not only about misunderstanding old documents. There had been an opportunity to correct the problem before it ever reached my property. As the wedding day moved closer, I had one final question to answer. Who knew about the warning, and why was it ignored? The answer was about to reveal a completely different side of the HOA's story. The discovery of the old message from the former HOA board member changed the entire situation. Until that moment, I believed the problem came from a simple mistake that grew over time. But now there was proof that someone inside the HOA had already noticed the problem years earlier. The question was no longer only about the missing fence. It was about why a warning was ignored and how that mistake was allowed to continue. My attorney helped me trace the message back to the person who wrote it. Her name was Linda Harper, and she had served on the HOA board before Rebecca Whitmore became president. When we contacted her, she agreed to explain what happened. Linda told us that during her time on the board, she reviewed the old planning maps and immediately noticed something unusual. The lines shown on those maps did not match the official county survey. She brought the issue up during a board discussion and recommended that the HOA verify every boundary before making decisions that affected private property. According to Linda, the board at the time decided to postpone the review because there were other community projects happening. The concern was placed in the records, but no formal action followed. Over the years, new board members joined, old members left, and the warning became just another document in a crowded archive. Nobody destroyed it. Nobody removed it. It was simply forgotten. But that forgotten warning became the most important piece of information in my entire case. It showed that the HOA had access to the truth long before my fence was removed. I shared Linda's statement with my attorney, and we added it to the evidence file. The situation had now changed from a disagreement over a boundary into a question about responsibility. The wedding was getting closer every day, and my family wanted the celebration to remain focused on happiness instead of conflict. I decided that the best solution was still not to attack the HOA. I wanted them to acknowledge the mistake and correct the process so nobody else would face the same problem in the future. When Rebecca received the updated evidence, her response was different from before. She did not immediately defend the HOA decision. Instead, she asked to review everything one more time with the board. For the first time, it seemed like the confidence surrounding the original decision was beginning to disappear. But then another unexpected issue appeared. While preparing the final documents, my attorney found a note attached to the original HOA archive folder. It was written by a county employee who had reviewed similar boundary questions years earlier. The note explained that private property rights could not be changed by community assumptions or planning materials. The official records had always been the deciding factor. That meant the HOA did not just misunderstand one document. They had ignored an entire process that existed to prevent exactly this type of situation. With the wedding only days away, I finally had the complete picture. But there was still one thing I needed to know. Would Rebecca and the HOA admit the mistake before the celebration began, or would they continue defending a decision they could no longer support? The closer we moved toward the wedding day, the more important it became to find a solution that protected my property and allowed my family to celebrate without more distractions. After everything we discovered, I expected the HOA board to either acknowledge the mistake or prepare for a longer dispute. Instead, Rebecca Whitmore requested one final meeting with the board, my attorney, and me. She said she wanted to review every document carefully before making a decision. When we entered the meeting, the atmosphere was completely different from the first time. Rebecca was no longer speaking with the same confidence she had when the fence was removed. The official survey, the archived warnings, Linda Harper's statement, and the county notes were all placed on the table. Each document told the same story. The property boundary had never changed. The HOA had relied on information that was never intended to define ownership. Rebecca looked through the records one by one, and for the first time, she admitted that the board had made a serious mistake. She explained that she became president after years of hearing the same assumption repeated by previous leaders. Everyone believed the old map represented the true boundary because nobody had taken the time to verify it. But believing something for many years did not make it legally correct. That was the lesson everyone in the room had to accept. However, there was still a major issue left unresolved. The fence had not been restored, and the wedding was approaching quickly. My family had planned the ceremony around the ranch landscape, and the missing boundary changed the entire feeling of the location. I asked the HOA board what they planned to do next. Rebecca said the HOA would begin the process of correcting the mistake and restoring what had been changed. She also agreed that the organization needed a new review system so future decisions would be based on official records instead of assumptions. That decision was important to me because I never wanted another property owner to experience the same situation. But just as we thought the biggest problem was solved, another unexpected detail appeared. While reviewing the security footage one more time, my attorney noticed something unusual. The workers who removed the fence had not only taken down the old sections. They had also moved some of the materials to a different location on the property. The question became why that happened and who gave those instructions. Rebecca immediately said she was not aware of that part of the process. The board members looked surprised because they believed the work had only involved removing the fence. With the wedding only a short time away, we now had another unanswered question. The HOA had admitted the boundary mistake, but there was still confusion about what happened after the decision was made. I thought the story was finally reaching its end, but one final discovery was waiting. The answer was hidden in the instructions given to the workers on the day the fence disappeared. The final discovery about the fence removal instructions revealed a detail that changed how everyone understood what happened that night. Until that moment, the HOA board believed the workers had simply followed a general request to remove a structure they believed was placed incorrectly. But when we reviewed the instructions given to the workers, we found something important. The document they received did not mention a confirmed property violation. It only referred to a concern that needed further review. The difference was clear. The HOA had treated a question as if it were a proven fact. That decision created a chain of events that affected my property and my family's wedding plans. I asked Rebecca how the board approved the work without first confirming the boundary through official records. She admitted that the board relied on previous discussions and information passed down from earlier members. No one had stopped to verify whether those assumptions matched the county records. The mistake was not caused by one person. It came from a system where people trusted old information more than official evidence. That realization changed the conversation. The focus was no longer about blaming individuals. It was about making sure the same mistake could not happen again. The HOA agreed to update its procedures. Any future questions involving private property would require official documentation before any action was taken. For me, that was the outcome I wanted from the beginning. I did not want conflict with my neighbors. I wanted my property respected and the truth recognized. But there was still one final challenge. The wedding was now only 1 day away, and the ranch still looked different without the original fence. My family had spent months planning the celebration, and I wanted the day to be remembered for the right reasons. I worked with a small team to prepare the area and create a new temporary arrangement for the event. The open space actually created a unique setting, but I still knew the missing fence represented everything that had happened. The next morning, as guests started arriving at the ranch, something unexpected happened. A group of local ranchers who had followed the situation came by with a surprise. They knew the story and wanted to support the celebration. They brought something that perfectly matched the spirit of the ranch. A herd of longhorns appeared in the distance, calmly walking across the open landscape. The sight immediately changed the mood. What started as a stressful dispute became a moment that represented the character of the land itself. The ranch was not defined by a missing fence. It was defined by its history, its people, and the truth behind the property. But as everyone prepared for the wedding, I noticed Rebecca standing quietly near the edge of the property. She was watching the scene and holding a folder of documents. She told me there was one more thing she needed to share. Something she had discovered while reviewing the HOA records after the meeting. And this final piece of information would reveal why the fence removal happened at the exact moment it did. The wedding morning arrived with a feeling I never expected. Just a few days earlier, I was standing on my ranch trying to understand why my fence had disappeared and why an organization that was supposed to support the community had made a decision that affected my private property. Now, as guests arrived and the celebration began, the same open land that created so much confusion had become the most memorable part of the day. Before the ceremony started, Rebecca Whitmore approached me with the folder she had been carrying. She looked different from the person who confidently explained the fence removal days earlier. This time, she was not defending a decision. She was sharing information she had discovered while reviewing old HOA records. Inside the folder was a series of emails from previous board discussions. The messages showed that several years earlier, another HOA member had suggested reviewing the property boundaries before making any changes near private land. The review was never completed because the board believed the issue was not urgent. Rebecca explained that when she became president, she inherited years of unfinished discussions and assumptions. She followed what previous leaders believed without realizing the original questions had never been answered. The discovery helped explain why the fence removal happened when it did. The HOA was preparing for a community improvement project nearby, and the board wanted the area to match their understanding of the old plans before the wedding brought more attention to the property. But they never verified whether those plans had any legal authority. Rebecca admitted that the timing was wrong and the process was wrong. She apologized for the stress it caused my family, and promised that the HOA would make changes. I accepted the apology because the goal was never to embarrass anyone. I wanted the truth, and I wanted the mistake corrected. Then the moment everyone remembered happened. As the wedding guests gathered near the ranch, a herd of longhorns appeared across the open field. They moved calmly through the landscape, creating a scene that looked like it belonged there all along. Everyone stopped to watch. The same open space that had caused so much disagreement became the background for one of the most beautiful moments of the celebration. My daughter laughed, the guests took photos, and the ranch felt alive. The missing fence that was supposed to create a problem had accidentally revealed the character of the land itself. It showed everyone that the property was not just about boundaries on a map. It was about history, family, and the connection people had with the place. Later that afternoon, Rebecca asked to speak with me one more time. She told me the HOA board had completed its final review and found something else connected to the original decision. A detail that explained why nobody questioned the old map sooner. It was not a legal issue. It was a human one. And the final truth would show how easily a small misunderstanding could become a major conflict when nobody stopped to verify the facts. The wedding ended up becoming a day my family would remember for reasons we never expected. What started as a dispute over a missing fence became a lesson about ownership, responsibility, and the importance of checking the truth before making decisions. After the celebration was over, I walked across the ranch and looked at the open land that had caused so much confusion. The view was peaceful, but I knew the story behind it would stay with me for a long time. A few days later, the HOA completed its final review and officially documented what had happened. The board admitted that the old planning map should never have been used as proof of a property boundary. They also acknowledged that removing the fence before verifying the information was a mistake. Rebecca Whitmore personally apologized and explained that she wanted the HOA to become more careful in the future. She told me that leadership was not about always being right. It was about having the courage to correct mistakes when the facts showed something different. The HOA created a new review process requiring official county records and property documents before any action involving private land could be considered. For me, that was the most important outcome. The situation was never about defeating the HOA or proving someone wrong. It was about making sure the same misunderstanding did not happen again to another homeowner. The fence was eventually restored, but something else had changed. The relationship between my family and the community became more respectful because everyone understood the importance of communication and facts. Looking back, the most surprising part of the entire experience was how a simple assumption created such a complicated situation. A map that was never meant to define ownership became accepted as truth because people repeated it for years. Nobody stopped to ask whether it was accurate. Nobody compared it with the official records until the mistake affected someone directly. That was the real lesson. Information is only valuable when it is verified. A document, a tradition, or a belief does not automatically become a legal fact just because people have trusted it for a long time. The Longhorns that appeared during the wedding became the image everyone remembered. They represented the ranch exactly as it was meant to be seen, open, historic, and connected to the land. The missing fence that created the conflict ended up creating a moment that brought people together. Months later, I still think about that morning when I first saw the empty space where my fence had been. At that moment, I thought someone had taken something away from me. But in the end, the experience gave me something unexpected. It reminded me that patience, evidence, and respect for the truth are stronger than assumptions. The ranch remained mine, the community learned an important lesson, and the story ended not with a fight, but with a better understanding between neighbors.